Museum of Natural History and elsewhere. It's very good to see this wonderful select group here for the first of our 2 museum conversations this year. And it's wonderful that on behalf of Susan Weber, our director, and of our dean, Peter Miller, I can welcome you this evening to the museum conversation with Marla Berns. Now, Marla Berns is the Shirley and Ralph Shapiro Director of the Fowler Museum at the University of California, Los Angeles. This was the museum that was founded in 1963 to function as a laboratory of ethnic art and technology. I'm always attracted to the idea of museums as laboratories. I think this always makes it, it appeals to me. Now, Marla is a real UCLA loyalist, having received all her degrees from there, specializing in the arts of Africa. Now, this isn't to say that she hasn't had broad experience elsewhere, as director of the University Art Museum at the University of California in Santa Barbara, and as director of the Department of Design, Housing and Apparel at the Goldstein Museum of Design at the University of Minnesota. So I think Marla is one of the most versatile and fascinating museum scholars I know, and currently working anywhere. That's a big claim, but I'm going to stick by it. I hugely admire her propensity consistently to dodge easy classification, and that's something that I always think is really exciting. You can't pin her down. Her thought and practice compass the world. She's curated numerous exhibitions on many topics, from Japanese textiles to the history of underwear. And her work has appeared not only at the Fowler, but also at numerous other institutions. The National Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C., the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris. She's contributed to many publications, and I'm not going to actually mention any of them, but many, notably but far from exclusively on African subjects. She's received many distinctions, and I'm going to mention just one because I think it's a really special one. She was invested this year as a Chevalier de l'Ordre des Arts et Lettres by the President of France.
Thank you.
So, given the breadth of cultural practice at the Fowler, Marla's own devoted attention to human inventiveness in all its breadth, manifested by decorative arts, design, and material culture, it seems only natural that we here at the BGC should delight in and celebrate a kindred spirit, institution and director on the West Coast. Now, Marla is currently running a suite of, I love this term for exhibitions, a suite of 8 exhibitions, Fowler at 50. And this is a suite of 8 exhibitions, I love you saying that term, suite, conceived to celebrate and summarize the remarkable trajectory of the UCLA Fowler Museum's growth over the last 5 decades. And this is the topic of Marla's presentation this evening, the Fowler at 50.
Thank you. Thank you, Ivan, for that very generous introduction. And I'm very happy to be here. I was very happy to receive the invitation when we were still in the process of creating this 50th anniversary extravaganza. And as most of you know, when museums confront this kind of propitious moment, you think it's an opportunity to look back, it's an opportunity to think forward, and really to look at where you've been and where you're going. And as Ivan said, we decided to do this suite of exhibitions, which I will tell you about in a minute, but I thought before we get to the present moment, it would be important for you to hear a little bit about where we've come from and why I think the Fowler Museum at UCLA is such a special kind of place. And it's not just because of my relatively short tenure of 12 years as director, but really because of the efforts and creativity of my predecessors. And I also think that it's important to note that university museums tend to be more bold and more adventurous than other museums. I think it's the fact that we are in an academic environment where pushing the boundaries of the known and the unknown, and where questioning the status quo are really de rigueur of the intellectual process. And so the Fowler Museum at UCLA, as a part of a relatively young university, has really had the opportunity to explore new ideas, to play with new approaches, and to set new models of working and teaching, as well as be encouraged to chart new territories and tackle new subjects, which is a mandate that's come from the top down to where the Fowler is today. But I will say that not all university museums are so progressive in their thinking, and there are museums that are not on university campuses that are. But what I think distinguishes the Fowler Museum and others like it is that we don't conform to the kinds of assumptions, the kinds of hierarchical distinctions, and the kinds of disciplinary silos that I think really hold museums back from really pushing forward and experimenting in the ways they can. And so the Fowler, for me, I like to call us a boundary buster, not a ghost buster, but a boundary buster, and an institution, as Ivan was suggesting, that's had a very long and distinguished history of transgressing the divides that exist between Western and non-Western, between art and artifact, between art museum and non-art museum, and between art and anthropology, archaeology, or a whole long list of other disciplines. And so the history of transgression that we've sort of encompassed deals with having been an institution that emphasizes interdisciplinarity, collaboration, experimentation, and knowledge making that has all been about opening up pathways to new ways of understanding the world in which we live through the arts and the humanities. And I think embedded in this practice has been a real appetite for risk, a really big appetite for risk, as well as a willingness to push beyond the typical, the comfortable, and the proven. And so it is not incidental that the name we were given when we were established in 1963 by an extremely forward-thinking chancellor named Franklin D. Murphy was Laboratory of Ethnic Art and Technology. And I think the use of that word signaled right away that UCLA was willing to create something new and something with unlimited possibility. And so our mandate from the get-go was global, with an emphasis on Africa, the Pacific, Asia, and the indigenous Americas, and with a little dose of Europe thrown in here and there. And our purview was to encompass multiple disciplines: art history, anthropology, archaeology, and really any other field that seemed relevant. And so the museum was given an opportunity really to invent itself, and thus it did. And it did so by collecting broadly and deeply, by developing exhibition approaches and display strategies that could function to share not only the artworks, but really the pioneering field research that had accelerated in the 1960s and 1970s in light of the post-colonial independence movements. So UCLA needed a place to house things that faculty started to bring back from the far-flung places where they were doing their research. The 1960s were also a time when the government was funding area studies programs, African studies, Latin American studies, Near Eastern studies. So there was a heightened interest in the international at UCLA. And of course, there was the liberal consciousness of the 60s, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement. All of these actions were taking place right in the city of Los Angeles and on the UCLA campus. And of course, the decolonization of Africa and other places. So the museum was born at a really important moment in time, and an important moment in time where it could really take flight right away. And I think in a lot of ways that's precisely what the museum did. And I will also say that the Fowler Museum, or its second name was Museum of Cultural History, came about at just about the very same time that the art history department, and one of the first in the country, hired an Africanist. And hired an Africanist not just to teach African art, but he taught African, Native American, pre-Columbian, and Pacific because if you were non-Western, you had to do it all. And those were the days when literally you did it all. So I think that the founding legacy of the museum is important to note, because I think it really did open us up to this climate of experimentation and innovation, which has been the hallmark of the institution. Now, the thing that really made a huge difference to the museum, because of course it couldn't live on spirit alone, was the fact that the same chancellor that founded the museum negotiated this staggering donation of 30,000 works of art from the Wellcome Trust in London. And if you can imagine a 2-year-old baby museum that lived in the basement of a classroom building, receiving over 2 years a succession of crates, all arriving by sea, containing 30,000 objects of art and of material culture. And these are some of the most iconic objects that came as a part of this welcome gift. The Nkisi figure to the left, this Nigerian, southeastern Nigerian head crest, this wonderful mask from the Aharo of the Papuan Gulf of Papua New Guinea, and the Mbole figure to the right. All these pieces are but a tiny sampling of what came in with this windfall of a gift. And what's amazing, we were just talking about the history of collections, is to uncover this wonderful image of the first show to be made out of that collection, literally the same year it came in. If it was in today's museum world, it would have taken 5 years to have produced an exhibition with 450 pieces from the collection, but they just picked them and put them out there. And they lifted that Nkisi up on a pedestal because the curator at the time had this incredible perspective for someone who was teaching in the late 50s and early 60s. It was a kind of anti-Darwinist, evolutionist approach that most people had at the time, that all art could be a masterpiece from all places in the world. And hence, he elevated it in the way that was pretty hard to find at this period of time, although you probably could see art shown in this way even here at the Museum of Primitive Art in New York. So with this as part of the mandate, to really regard this material as art, the museum also set out to learn about the objects it collected and to encourage the kind of field research that then became the basis of our exhibitions. And our name was changed in 1971 to the Museum of Cultural History. It was a very purposeful choice of name to avoid being an art museum or an ethnography museum, but to be a museum that looked at the cultural history of peoples around the globe, and to do so with a very specifically, intensively interpretive approach to contextualize the art that was coming out and to include the field research of the people who were newly going into the field to do it. And I'm showing you one of our early exhibitions. We didn't have our own exhibition space. We used a gallery that was in another building. And this is sort of paradigmatic of the early Fowler or Museum of Cultural History style of exhibition making. Lots of color in the walls. You never saw white walls. Density of presentation. This wasn't about masterpieces. And this was an exhibition that was based on research done by a woman named Vicki Elson, who was one of the first people to go to the Kutch area, which was very remote at the time. She made collections. She went on 3 expeditions, and all of this material became part of the Fowler Museum. And so we have one of the great collections of this material from Kutch. And this is the kind of way that our exhibition program unfolded, with one major show a year in a borrowed space. And I'm showing you 2 more examples of 80s exhibitions. The famous Ebo Exhibition, which was the first exhibition to present the field research of Herbert Cole, who's one of the primary art historians to have done work among the Ebo. And then the second was a show done by Jerome Feldman, who was one of the pioneering Pacific art historians. And that was another, it was showing a private collection that we had received And the Ebo show was based on a cluster of objects from the Welcome collection, but then it was mostly a lone show. And you can see this Fowler approach. If there was a picture, you included it. There were photo murals, there were slideshows. This was before video, so there were no videos, but had there been videos, you would have seen them. And so the Fowler developed its reputation around these thematic exhibitions that were also beautiful to look at, and also took a lot of care in the designs of the installations. And all of them traveled. They traveled to 2, to 3, to 4, to more museums across the country, including the AMNH. Many of our shows went there because we were one of the only museums to be doing this kind of project. And in 1992, this is a watershed moment, we finally got a building. It took only 29 years, but we got a building. And they said it couldn't be done, but we were able to raise the money to build a purpose-built building that looks just like all the other brick buildings at UCLA, but we figured out ways of trying to distinguish it as a museum. And by the time we moved into the building, our collection had grown to nearly 100,000 works of art and material culture. A huge collection. It's a research collection. And when we moved into the building, the exhibition program also grew to about 12 exhibitions a year. So the program was incredibly dynamic and incredibly active. And I would say that in the 1990s, the first decade of the new Fowler Museum, probably the Sacred Arts of Haitian Voodoo was one of our most popular and most important exhibitions. It too traveled to 7 locations, including the AMNH. It was really the first exhibition to seriously tackle the problem of explaining to the American public what the religion of Voodoo was and what the religion is. And it did so by explaining it through the incredibly rich panoply of arts that define Voodoo sacred practice. And we all know that Voodoo continues to be a derogatory word used for anything that you want to claim has been irrationally conceived. And it's partly because people don't understand the religion. And despite all of our efforts, and we included the really groundbreaking scholarship of Donald Cosentino and Marilyn Holberg. And in fact, we've just done a kind of reprise to the exhibition called In Extremis, Death and Life in 21st Century Haitian Art, which is more of a contemporary show that looks at all of the devastation in the 21st century in Haiti. And it's currently at the Museum of Civilization in Quebec City. And so this exhibition was important because it also included another characteristic of Fowler Project, which is the inclusion of these immersive environments that really tried to bring people into the religion itself, into the lived experience of being in a space where a Vodou ritual might take place. And you can see the sacred veve on the ground, which activated the space and was done by an actual Vodou mambo, as were the altars in the exhibition. They were living altars. They weren't recreations. And I'd like to just show you a couple other things. I mean, I wish I had more time. I could show you more about what the Fowler does, but this just gives you a little bit of a taste of this really kind of broad-based interest in things, as Ivan was saying. And this was a project that we did in 2003. I was a part of a consortium that was looking at the impact of Buddhism on contemporary art in American life. And the result of this consortium was this project that we did at the Fowler called From the Veranda, Art, Buddhism, Presence. It involved the work of several institutions and also engaged a wonderful architect named Michael Rotundi and a performance artist slash Zen archer slash Buto priest named Hirokazu Kosaka, who designed this beautiful minimalist veranda. And that was the only thing in this 6,500 square foot space. And it was a beautiful project with only one work of art, the Marble Rice House by the artist Wolfgang Leib. But the challenge of this exhibition was that the exhibition was about being and not about knowing. And audiences are so accustomed to coming to exhibitions and being told exactly what they need to know, and being told what path to take through exhibitions. And so this was an exhibition that actually you sort of kneeled as you came through, in the same way you might as you were entering a tea ceremony. You had to take off your shoes, and visitors were quite stumped by an exhibition of this nature. And we engaged our guards to actually welcome them, invite them in, so that there was a personal invitation from someone who was inside the gallery, and it really helped a lot. But still, unless you were a meditator or you were familiar, this was a very unusual but quite beautiful thing. And I would just have to say that, of course, it's so different from those paradigmatic shows that it would cause surprise. And I was completely comfortable with the exhibition being difficult for some people, because I think the only way you have people experience more is to give them the opportunity to move beyond their comfort zone. And I think it was a beautiful space, and programs of all kinds took place right inside of the gallery. But then, speaking of the bold and the unexpected, we did this exhibition, which is a gallery filled with remarkable dresses made entirely out of industry-rejected condoms that were dyed, that were cut, that were spliced, where every part of the condom was actually used to create these gorgeous gowns made by the Brazilian artist Adriana Bertini, which was part of a larger collaborative effort that we did with the Art Global Health Center at UCLA. And the project was called Make Art, Stop AIDS, and it was all about the various artists who are intervening in the global pandemic in the hotspots of South Africa, India, Brazil, and of course the US. But these gowns made out of condoms were intended to have people understand that the use of condoms was both about pleasure and protection, and that the beauty of the gowns was to make sure that people understood that the pleasure was not being taken away from them. And we also used this for a really ambitious educational outreach programs with high school kids and also college students, where they were really comfortable to talk about their sexuality in an environment filled with these amazing dresses. So I think, you know, the Fowler's success is really about this ability to tackle almost anything we want. And we're lucky. We don't have a board telling us what to do. We don't have a university administration saying we can't do this, we have to do that. And we're able to do things that we think push the envelope of the kinds of things you see in exhibitions, and also make sure that people understand the really incredible creativity of humankind and the diversity of ways in which people express their inventiveness and their artistry. And I would also have to say that one of the reasons we can do what we do is because we're a team. Every exhibition is done collaboratively by curators, our educators, and our designer. Everyone sits at the table. I sit at the table. I mean, if I have to do all that other stuff, at least I can participate in something fun. And we make these things happen together, and I think it's part of the reason why we can do what we do. Another big change that occurred in 2006 was the Fowler Museums, my predecessors, really wanted to build a dynamic changing exhibition program and involve the collections and special exhibitions. And there was, in the original plans, one of the galleries was going to be given over to permanent collections, but it never happened. And so the museum had been really working at a pretty frantic pace of changing 3 major galleries like 3 times a year. And so I really felt it was time for us to do something with the permanent collections, because we really needed a predictable resource for teaching and for K-12 outreach, so that teachers and faculty didn't have to always find out what's going to be at the Fowler next quarter, because of the diversity of the things that we do. And so we did a lot of research. We went and saw exhibitions across the country. We went to exhibitions in Europe. And we really knew that we wanted to do something that was every bit as innovative as the temporary shows that we'd been doing. And so after a long process of thought, we decided that we would show our permanent collections from Africa, from Asia, from the Americas, and from the Pacific in one exhibition that was not geographical and not temporal, but rather was going to be defiantly cross-cultural and thematic, that we were going to show in a series of big thematic spaces how art all over the world is made to act, to make a difference in people's lives, to promote knowledge, to enhance power, and to further transformations of various kinds. And so that was the thematic structure. And here you're seeing a view of the first gallery, which is Art in Action. And these three pieces you see are famous Nkisi, who's come back a little bit closer to the ground, and that great Aharo mask from Papua New Guinea, and this incredible piece from New Caledonia. Actually, the Kay Brownlee has the most amazing exhibition of art from Kanak I've ever seen, which is on view now. But in the same space with these really important ritual objects is this beautiful crown made in the 1990s by the artist Jose Rodriguez, who lives right here in Brooklyn, who's of Cuban and Puerto Rican descent, and who has embraced the Afro-Cuban Yoruba religion and made this crown for an exhibition we did called Beads, Body and Soul, Art and Light in the Yoruba Universe, which was done in the late 90s. And we acquired it, but it is a container of Yoruba power, of Ashe, but it's a contemporary work, and it lives right alongside these really important late 19th, early 20th century works. And even more importantly, in the case you see behind is a section that we call Beauty and Purpose, Art That Works, and it includes Japanese baskets, Nigerian decorated gourds, Peruvian ceramics, and a whole array of objects that are used in chewing betel. And we did that on purpose in order to show that the entwinement of artistry and efficacy is common to both sacred and secular objects, but it's really the fact that the artistic impulse is all about making something work better, really is global, across time, and across the kind of categories of art making, whether it's high or low or art or craft or whatever you want to call it, because those distinctions don't exist for us in this exhibition. So now that's a little bit of background on the Fowler, just to give you a sense for what we've done and where we were when we began to think about the 50th anniversary. And I think that turning 50 really, for me, meant a kind of celebration of the institution's receptivity to change and the openness of our thinking. And I think you can see right away, you saw the building before, that this is the Fowler at the launch of our 50th anniversary. We really were trying to say to the campus, you got to come in here, something cool's going on. What are all these beach balls doing coming out of the towers and flowing over the top of the building, and all the colorful signs in the kind of branding that we did. And actually, what we did is we worked with a wonderful Argentine artist named Maximo Gonzalez, who lives in Mexico City, and I had visited his studio when I was in Mexico and saw a project like this that he had done in Madrid. And I just couldn't think of a better metaphor for the Fowler. The project is called Walk Among Worlds. And the artist, this is what, I'm just going to read you something that the artist said about the project himself. In Walk Among Worlds, I explore the effects of light and lightness while reflecting on the political divisions of the world. All the globes were manufactured in China, generally considered to be the world's factory. According to the artist, a tour of Walk Among Worlds is a contemplative journey to the center of the earth, which may lead to a reformulation of our understanding of it. And I couldn't have thought of a better metaphor for the Fowler and what you do when you come to the museum. And this is a picture of it on the opening night party when we had, theater lights illuminating it. And it was an incredible project. There are 5,000 beach balls, and we inflated them with the help of students and put them up, and it's now down. We only kept it up for a little over a month. But it was truly an ebullient kind of statement to make, and everybody had a great time. How could you not? And it really symbolized what I felt was the spirit of the institution. And so I was thrilled that we were able to raise the money to do it for the launching of Fowler at 50. But the real programmatic package, as Ivan told you, was this idea of creating a suite of exhibitions. Because I thought about, what do we do at 50? We've already done intersections. We don't need to do another masterpiece show. We've already kind of done that, but in a very thematic way. And I really thought that doing this suite of exhibitions could summarize who we are and what we do best. And this is one of the 8 pods. We decided it was easier to call them pods than to call them small exhibitions. And this is the one that looks at our CPIC collection, especially in the context of the incredible outflow of material from New Guinea in the 1960s, when people in New Guinea discovered that their art had a meaning and purpose outside of the island. And it just flooded out in the museum. The Fowler acquired 4,500 works in a short span of 7 years in the 1960s. Not all good, and not all the kind of material that you would have found pre-contact, but still an interesting topic to consider. So we have this incredible collection. It's more than 120,000 objects big at this point in time. And it was clear to me that our excellence derives from more than just the having of a collection like this. But our strengths have really been in what we do with the collection. So I really wanted us to explore our capacity to treat these expansive resources as dynamic assets, subject to multiple viewpoints and multiple voices, evaluation and reevaluation, consideration and reconsideration by not only our own curators, but by scholars, students, and artists. And so we organized these 8 pods in 2 large galleries and really focused on our collection of artworks from Africa, the Pacific, and the Americas. And we actually brought out of storage and opened all at the same time these 8 exhibitions with 1,000 works of art from our collections. And it nearly killed us, but you only turn 50 once, and you only do this to your staff once, so I won't be able to do it again, so that's it. And I will also tell you that the majority of the works in these exhibitions have never been seen before. So, and it was, of course, a conservation nightmare. Not well. It was challenge. And each of the 8 exhibitions features a particular sub-collection within the collection. And I really felt that the totality of the 8 creates a kind of spectacle, really was a Fowler spectacle, but also really showed our vitality and our ability to take multiple approaches at the same time. And we also really wanted the display and the curatorial process to be transparent. And so each exhibition declared what it was about, and each exhibition has a very different look to it. So I'm going to talk to you in some detail about 3 of the 8, because if I tried to talk to you about all of them, we'd be here all night. It takes at least 90 minutes to do a gallery tour of all these exhibitions. So the first, and I chose these 3 because they really are distinctive in the way they've engaged contemporary approaches for the museum. The first one is Double Fortune, Double Trouble, Art for Twins Among the Yoruba. And this is actually the first exhibition you see. And our designer, Sebastian Clough, decided to peel away a lot of those black ceiling tiles and put up milky plex and light, so that suddenly the galleries looked other than they've ever looked before. The installation design was almost like radiating spokes, and each space was kind of a triangular, irregular form. And this is the first one you saw, and I really think it achieved what I wanted. I wanted people to walk in and just go, wow. I wanted a jaw drop. And I think we did it because in this installation there are over 250 twin memorial figures that the Yoruba call Ibeji. And for the Yoruba, twins are considered special sacred children, and they're special in life and they're special after life. And when one or both twins depart, and the Yoruba like to say that they've departed and not died, special attention is given to them, and a diviner is consulted, and a small sculpture is made like this. And what you're seeing on the left is one pair of Ibeji figures. And the reason that the Fowler has so many Ibeji is because the Yoruba have the highest incidence of twin births probably in the world. So for every 25 to 45, out of 1,000 pregnancies, 25 to 45 are twin births. And of course it's genetic now, but also there's the theory that in the yams that people eat, there's a particular hormone that encourages women to have multiple ovulations. And so there are more twin births. And of course, multiple births are dangerous births. So a lot of twins die, either in childbirth or shortly after. The exhibition looks at twinning as probably the primary example of two-ness in Yoruba thought. But the idea of two-ness and duality and complementarity actually pervades Yoruba thinking. And so we included a number of other kinds of Yoruba objects that are also in twos. The double nature of Eshu, the trickster, which often has two heads looking in two directions. Gelede, that's performed with two masks. So we wanted to talk about the philosophical underpinnings to twin births and to twin thought among the Yoruba, in addition to dealing with how the Yoruba themselves regard these twins. And there's a wonderful symmetry to dealing with the Yoruba and dealing with the Ibeji for our 50th, because the first really important exhibition we did based on field research was called Black Gods and Kings, and it was done by Robert Ferris Thompson at Yale. And it was really the first exhibition to emanate from his pioneering field research in the 1960s. So I kind of liked that there was this circularity by starting with the Yoruba and bringing them back again. Now, what does it mean for a museum like the Fowler to own 400 Ibeji figures and to exhibit what you're looking at in this focus display is about 130 of them? What it really means, and of course this was, they mostly came to us through a bequest, and the bequest had about 300 Ibeji because one woman was mad. People are mad for Ibeji. The people who collect Ibeji don't stop at 2 or 4 or 10 or 50, but they just keep going because no two are alike, so you can't duplicate yourself. And so there's the quest for the next best Ibeji. And so we inherited this collection and have never shown it before. And it really gives people an opportunity to see the artist's hand in miniature, and also to see the incredible variation in what makes an Ibeji or a Yoruba style Yoruba. And you can see by looking at these that they're small figures, they conform to the proportions of a Yoruba sculpture, they have all the kind of features that would allow us to recognize their Yoruba-ness, but each one or each pair of them are very different. And also we wanted to make the point in the exhibition that there are Yoruba masters and there are Yoruba apprentices. apprentices, and we showed about 10 really bad ones that don't meet either our expectations or the Yoruba have their own aesthetic criteria, which has been documented, so they evaluate their own pieces according to issues of balance and some of the same things that we would also think to be more pleasing than not. But once these ibejis reach the hands of the parents who look to them and to use them as a focus of their prayer, they're washed, they're rubbed with indigo bluing, they're rubbed with washing bluing or indigo on their coiffures. Their bodies are rubbed with camwood. They're anointed, they're adorned, they're loved in order to encourage the living twins to stay and in order to honor the twins who've departed. And so they become a history of their life cycle, from the twin birth itself and the concept and the need, to the history of time in which they've been loved, and of course to the last phase of their journey where they end up in the museum context. And so this is a little taste of the installation, but we also wanted to make sure that people understood that nothing ever stands still. And people who still make commission ibejis today, because there is still an ongoing love for ibeji and a need to honor twin births. But the twin spirit can reside in a plastic doll, can reside in a photograph of the departed. So it's important to show that it's not always the material form that is there forever, but it's the immaterial, and it's providing a place for the hovering spirit of a twin to kind of rest and take root and be the focus of someone's prayer. And you could see that wonderful picture by Marilyn Holberg that shows you the living twin and the departed twin in the form of one of these plastic dolls. And as serendipity would have it, we met an artist who's actually based here in Brooklyn named Simone Lee. And Simone Lee has a particular fascination with African ethnography. And we learned because our curator, Gemma Rodriguez, met her at a Creative Capital retreat. And it turns out that she was completely fascinated with ibeji. And she came to the Fowler and looked at our ibeji collection. And we actually commissioned her to do an installation around her particular interest in ibeji. And she wanted to do her project completely using the plastic dolls. But let me go back. And you can see the plastic dolls are incorporated into this piece. And you can see how it's a bit of a wide-angle lens, but it's actually just to the side of the Yoruba pod on the way to the Maori one that's beyond it. And Simone Lee is a really interesting artist. This is her installation at the Kitchen in 2012. The name of her project is You Don't Know Where Her Mouth Has Been. What you're looking at to the left is her chandelier piece, which includes 65 porcelain-fired cowrie shells. And cowrie shells are, of course, one of the most important forms of currency in Africa, but also elsewhere. And she creates these cowrie shells by molding the porcelain around a watermelon. And so there are lots of interesting stereotypes that come into play in her work. And the other interesting thing about the cowries is that they're kind of scary. So aside from being these beautiful fired porcelain objects, they also look a little bit dangerous, like vagina dentata. And that's a part of Simone Lee's work, that everything has kind of two sides. There's the dangerous and the safe. And in fact, the two-sidedness is also like the Yoruba twinning concept of duality. And the name of her installation, and you're looking at what she did for us on the left, she would have done it entirely out of the plastic dolls, but we literally could not get them from Ghana. We wanted to ship 800 dolls, but we could only get a couple hundred. So she created a new work by combining the plastic dolls with the cowries. And the name of her piece is actually called Topsy-Turvy. Some of you may know this. I didn't, but this is what she says about her piece. The Ibeji remind me of American dolls called Topsy-Turvy, and you're looking at a picture of a Topsy-Turvy doll. Topsy-Turvy dolls are constructed with two sides. One is a white doll and the other is a black doll. Because of a skirt that flips back and forth, you can only see one identity, one head of the doll at a time. So like the Ibeji in the Fowler collection, Topsy-Turvy dolls also act as a foil for another hidden identity. Titling my work Topsy-Turvy, I'm conflating the idea of a plastic Ibeji as a representation for a departed twin with the American Topsy-Turvy doll that can only represent one side of itself at a time. So this is a really kind of new gesture on our part to invite an artist in to do a piece that we weren't quite sure what it was going to be, although she did make the proposal, but the addition of the cowrie shells sort of complicates the messages by actually referencing the cowries that are often present with Ibeji. Many Ibeji wear little cowrie vests, which indicate that the household that the Ibeji is from is a royal household or a household with people who could afford to accumulate so many cowrie shells. And so for Simone, the cowrie is, of course, an important signifier of these multiple perspectives of danger and beauty. And her work plays with this idea of turning things inside out, just like the Topsy-Turvy doll, where craft becomes art, the ancient can look like the futuristic, and you can see that especially in her work in these two installations. And her stereotypes, the stereotypes that she borrows from, can be reframed. And so it was a surprise for people to find this installation within that presentation of Ibeji. But for us, I think that creating some questioning about what this was and what it meant was really a good point of complication to add to the installation. And this kind of slippage between categories and questioning why is really, of course, a part of the Fowler's history of making exhibitions. The next pod I'd like to talk about is called Maori Cloaks, Maori Voices. And I think you can see right away that this is a dramatically different kind of installation. It's a very quiet presentation, and there are only 13 Maori cloaks in the space. And these Maori cloaks had never been exhibited since they were acquired, unless one of them appeared in that early masterpiece show I showed you. And they haven't been exhibited in part because they're incredibly fragile objects, and also because our curator of Asian and Pacific collections, Roy Hamilton, did not want to show them until we could bring Maori advisors in to see them and to talk to us about them and to share with us how they feel about them in the present moment. And so we did both things. We made them worthy of exhibition, and we brought in Maori artists and Maori textile conservators to look at the cloaks and to talk to us about them, and I'm going to show you a little clip in a moment. I'm going to give you a different view. This is a bit of a better view. When the Polynesians who came from the eastern part of Polynesia made it to the island of Aotearoa, which is Maori for New Zealand, they found themselves in a climate they'd never encountered before, and they needed warm clothing. And so they also discovered that New Zealand flax, which is a super common plant, especially in a California garden, that the the outer part of the leaf could be scraped away, leaving very soft, very pliable fibers. And they learned how to twine them very tightly to produce these incredible cloaks. And we were actually able to put one of them on a form. But the one that is on the form is the oldest and rarest of the group. We know it was made before 1860, before contact. And we also were told by the woman who came to visit Rangi Te Kanawa from Te Papa Museum that it probably took 7 years to produce it. That's how labor-intensive this process of twining is. And the one that you're looking at that's flat is also made of the undyed flax, but also has these threads hanging, these twined hanging pieces that are dyed black by dipping them in tannin and then in an iron-rich mud, which turns them black. And that's one of the forms of ornamentation of these broad expanses of natural colored flax, along with very elaborate woven borders that frame most of these cloaks. I found this wonderful image that comes from the archive at the Musée de l'Homme, showing you at the turn of the century. And the Maori actually didn't arrive in New Zealand until about 900 years ago. So the period of occupation is fairly recent. And a lot of these cloaks, the cloaks that I'm showing you from the Fowler collection, all came from the Welcome Gift. They were all bought at auction between 1906 and 1920. We have the auction records. And it's one of the rare collections of these cloaks anywhere. And we have about 60 in our collection, but we only showed 13. But you can see how they were worn. You can see these hanging threads that decorate them. And you can also see, I think, some of the ones that are the most exquisite and valuable, which are the ones that are completely covered with bird feathers, birds that are indigenous to New Zealand. And we know that these feathered cloaks were made as early as the 18th century because they're in the records of Cook's first voyage in 1768 to 1771, but they were more popularly produced in the late 19th century. And this one, which is made out of the green and white feathers of the kereru, which is the New Zealand pigeon, and the reddy brown colored ones come from a bird called the kaka bird. And they're much rarer feathers because each kaka bird only produces a small number of this orange colored feather. So they are extremely valuable, extremely complicated to produce. And we know that this one was presented to a judge in the native land court that presided over the ways that the Maori were made to give over land to the British Crown. And these native land courts made determinations about which land had to be given over. And so, for reasons I don't know, this judge was actually given this feathered cloak by the Maori themselves. And actually, this is the one that was given over. And this is the one that's covered in those rare orange feathers from the kaka bird, and you could see those beautiful spots of peacock feathers. It's really an exquisite piece of work. But the Maori who came to talk about it think that the border is garish and terrible, and that it was probably made because they knew it was being given to a European. One of the things that we did, as I mentioned, that was so important to the process is we videotaped the Maori advisors who helped us look at these cloaks. And we did 4 days of filming. We had 2 days with an artist and 2 days with a conservator. And then we boiled this down to a 16-minute video that you can watch in the gallery. And then we created an interactive where you can actually hear them speaking about particular works. And this was one of the quotations that we pulled from the videos that I think is so telling and was so surprising for us how pleased and happy the our Maori advisors were when they came to visit us. They weren't shocked and appalled that we had these treasures, but rather they wanted us to share them, and they felt incredibly blessed to be in their presence. And so I'm going to show you a short video.
He mihi nunui, he mihi no mata ki te whiwhi, no mata ki te whiwhi kia whakapāti kēni. O ngai taha, ngā tamapapa, ko haunea, ko tangaroa, ko tukoro, ko tāne mahuta. Ngā mai te tō, te ragigirunga nei, ka hea te pō, ka tata te pō ki raro nei. O tira hapa te hapa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tata katoa kairaro. Okay, we can. Just have to do that. You usually find that if we move amongst old objects, we've got to pay tribute to the old objects. Sometimes you'll find that because they've been imbued or been on people, they carry the essence of those people on them. And I'm not sure how you might view them. I mean, people touch them and view them as objects. We touch and view them as living beings. So it's important for us to greet these, greet those who've been on them, and greet everybody here and what we bring into the room. My name's Carl Terangi Kawhiti Leonard. I come from a background of both carvers and weavers. I come from central North Island, Rotorua. When the arts were dying out in all other parts of the country, it was our area that actually maintained both the arts of carving, weaving, performing arts, oratory. We maintained most of the arts there. Luckily, because of tourism at the time, it actually helped ensure the survival of our art forms, where they actually passed away in many parts of our country. Just seeing them out in the open air it means a lot, I think, to us as Māori.
Kia ora tātou, greetings all. Welcome to you, Cindy, and thank you for welcoming us at the same time. My first visit to UCLA was in connection to these taonga. I was in the city and I'd heard about them and I wanted to pay respect and also I admit to soak up a bit of that aroha from home. I think that they were calling, you know. And I had my job interview in this very building, and so sort of knowing that behind that wall and behind that wall and behind that wall these guys were sitting, it's the same feeling as knowing that your mum and dad are out the side, waiting for you and cheering you on and supporting you.
I think, like many old pieces throughout the world, they cry out for their descendants just to come and visit them. Yes. Just to really sometimes to settle them.
Mm-hmm. Should I hit stop or just go forward? Okay. So I think, creating an exhibition like this really made the Fowler a kind of activist on the part of the Maori. And by bringing them in, by including their words, it was a different kind of involvement than bringing Maori to perform on the steps of a museum, where you can engage with a blessing of the space. But this was so important to hear from them what they thought about these pieces and to learn an incredible amount, especially from the textile conservator Rangi, who came from a real weaving family or textile family. And I just found this on the internet when I was Googling something and thought, what an amazing image that this is a woman, Winna Cooper, who's participating in the 70s in the desire for the Maori to take back their land that they were forced to give up. And in this view of her speaking, and you could see the passion, even in this picture, she's wearing her Western clothes, but she's got the mantle of her ancestors on her back. She has the authority of the past to go back to seek the land that belongs to the ancestors. And I just thought it was such a powerful image, and in some ways I'm sorry we didn't actually include it in the exhibition, but I think it's a nice way to end this presentation on the Maori. And I have one last one of the pods that I'd like to share with you, which is called New World Wunderkammer, a project by Amalia Mesa Berns. This large wonder cabinet or curiosity cabinet was conceived for us by the Chicana artist Amalia Mesa Berns, who I invited to the Fowler to make new meanings with our collection. We actually opened our storerooms wide open to her, and she embarked on a process of inquiry that led her to interrogate the lives of our objects and combine them in ways that would narrate the history of conquest and mixing in the New World. By recombining objects according to her own plan, Amalia's goal was to draw on their powers of protection and healing for her own purposes. Working on this project for 2 years and over 5 visits to the Fowler presented her and us an incredible opportunity to learn from each other. And I'm going to return to this a little bit, but I will also say right up front that opening up your collection to an artist like this in such an open-ended way was not without its challenges and its risks. But as things tend to happen in museums, what you end up seeing is the beautiful result of what ended up being a very positive experience and an incredible act of creativity on the part of Amalia. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her. She's a Chicana artist based in California. She's a mature artist. She's been working for a very long time. Most of her work deals with interpretations of Chicano home altars. Her medium is typically the altar, the laboratory, the curiosity cabinet. She's a MacArthur Fellow. She's had many exhibitions, and she writes very elegantly about her own work. And much of it is autobiographical. This was her project for what's now pretty famous, the Decade Show at the Studio Museum. You can see that it's a domestic space, that she's created an altar on that chest of drawers. And in the altar, she includes objects of memory and allusions to her own family and to her own troubled history. And I think that much of her work is really about the brutality of leaving Mexico and then of arriving in a place in which she was not made to be welcome. And a lot of her work has been about reclaiming a kind of healthy status in light of this kind of personal history. And so this work does what a lot of her projects do, which is explore different ways of knowing, things that are both personal and collective, emotional and intellectual, objective and subjective. And this seems to be a thread that permeates her work. And another project I want to show you is a more recent work that was part of Neo-Hoodoo Art for a Forgotten Faith that was at the Menil, and I believe it came to PS1 here in New York. And this was a work that the artist did in 2008, and it was the first work she did after nearly dying in a horrific car accident in 2003 that required her to have infinite numbers of surgeries and being hospitalized. And so it's the healer's Botanica. It's the healer's supply store. And it's everything from traditional materials of healing on the lower shelf to science on the top, to the science of medicine. And it also reminds us of this kind of intersection of tradition and science, of past and present, and the fact that you can draw on everything in order to heal yourself. And in the image is a picture of her paternal grandmother, who was a great healer and who brought with her these traditional practices from Mexico. And so I invited Amalia to do a project at the Fowler because I've been a great admirer of her work, but also because she came to do a talk at the Fowler about how artists engage their own spiritual practices in their work. And she sat on the stage and she said, you know, she was jealous because we had given an artist named Jose Bedia a chance to pull material from our collection and do a small exhibition. She said, no one's ever given me a chance to work with their collection. And I thought, okay, I can do this. And so we invited her, and that was how this project began. And I trusted her because I'd heard her speak, I'd read what she had to say, and I'd seen a number of her projects. And I was really excited about what it is she might do. And so this Wunderkammer, it's 25 feet long. It has 3 cabinets. On the left is a cabinet about the colonial experience, the central figure being St. John the Baptist. In the center is about her Mesoamerican origins with this Nayarit male-female couple. And on the right is the presence of Africans, enslaved Africans who were brought to the New World when they'd really worn out most of the labor force, the indigenous labor force. And the central figure is another Nkisi in the Fowler's collection. And the inclusion and the placement of the objects are intended to represent the collisions of culture that happened during the colonial era. But it gives them all an active role as witnesses to the violence, the loss, and the betrayals of that history. And it also gave the artists a chance to reclaim them as powerful agents of spiritual protection and healing. And as the collected, these objects tell stories of displacement from their origins in parallel fashion to the displacement that the artist herself feels. So Amalia has put our objects back to work, out of storage, and within this newly invented contact zone, and has had them doing the things that they were originally intended to do, to protect, to heal, and to build connections between the living and their ancestors, the secular and the sacred. And now I would like to play a little clip of Amalia's voice. And I'm supposed to... You can do it? Okay.
When I began the whole project, I was interested in the framework of mestizaje, or the mixing of the races, because in the New World, through forced slavery and immigration, 3 different groups came together. The Spanish colonial that overtook the indigenous world, the slaves that were brought in when an excessive amount of indigenous people died from either brutality, slavery, or disease. I guess what it really was about in the beginning is a sense of origin. That as a Mexican person, growing up in an era when my parents were undocumented and where, similar to this era, there were big questions about immigration, I feel as a Chicana, as a Mexicana, as a Latina, that I've battled all of these years to constitute this sense of origin, of belonging in this continent from the past to now. One of the reasons that I became interested in mestizaje is that it is part of my own family history. My grandmother was married to an American black, and she was in fact of mulatto origin herself. And my husband, who's African American, is sort of the last part of that story that passed down in my family. And so consequently, I have always had a very special interest in the African influence of tercer raíz, the 3rd root in Mexico, because it touches on my family and it touches on my marriage. And so a part of what I do in each of these stories is bring along my family through their images, but also to anchor them and their ancestries as African descended people. And the Cabinets of Curiosity also afforded me a kind of interdisciplinary look. My background is in psychology, art, and education. And so I've always had an interest in human civilizations and cultures around the world, the intersections of races and communities, and how that takes place. So the Wunderkammer was this space of wonder, and I think that at the heart of all art making is some sense of wonder and imagination. I was very lucky to have an invitation from the Fowler to participate in their 50th anniversary exhibitions, and I began over a 2-year period of time a series of visits. And my very first moment of going into the collections was totally, it was just overwhelming. But what happened to me was when I saw the collection, I had that first instinct of, oh, how did they get these? And then the second was this feeling of how cherished these objects were and how lucky I was that somebody had saved them. And as I got to know the staff and realized the immense care and concern with which they treat the objects, it really changed my idea of collecting. I've become very attached to the objects. I know they're not mine, but I feel like, oh, how sad it will be when I will lose them and they'll go back to their respective little trays or shelves. And I feel like this project allowed them to be seen, truly seen, and that's part of what the Fowler does. It allows objects that have meaningful histories to come out of the shadows and step forward and be understood. So that's for me the greatest feeling I have at the end of this, is that I was able to participate in the revelation of these iconic images and their histories. When I began the whole project, I was interested in the framework of mestizaje, or the mixing of the races, because in the New World, through forced slavery and immigration, 3 different groups came together. The Spanish colonial that overtook the indigenous world, the slaves that were brought in when...
Thank you. I thought, did she put the wrong one on there? It's too long. Okay, I'm just going to say a few more things about this because I want to leave some time for questions, but I just wanted you to see that the artist is bringing back the same things that you saw in the Curanderas Botanica, and it's important that her own artistic history travel with her, so she incorporates these earlier objects into her presentation. The beaker on the left holds all of the hospital bands from all the times that she was hospitalized, so her history of healing is also a part of this project. And her own artist books, those codices that botanical codices that she beautifully illustrates, are also part of her exploratory process. And I just want to say that part of her schema is that the central figures are her guardian figures. They're her protectors. And these are those 2 Nayarit figures. And at the bottom is a blessing space. These are actual altars with offerings in the way that they might be at her home. And each one of the 3 was different. And what we also did with the cabinet is we had 3 drawers that you could pull out, so that we created the opportunity for the visitor to actually interact with the cabinet and pull out. In this case, we've got an incredible collection of obsidian flint pieces from the welcome gift. I mean, hundreds of them. They came as a part of it. And so we had a chance to show them. And then Amalia also made her own prints by including images of the works in the cabinet in these giclée prints and restoring to our objects a sense of history and a sense of transformation. She's inserted St. John the Baptist into the transformation from the Aztec world to the Spanish conquest, and she's put that Haida rattle back into a Haida environment and done it in the memory of the famous Haida carver Bill Reed. But I wanted to end with this image to show, this is of course the opening, and there are lots of people at the opening, but I think that this particular installation was especially attractive. It was attractive because people were riveted by what they saw, by the opportunity I think they felt to make their own meanings out of it, because of course we didn't really tell them what to think, and we included an artist statement and also produced a brochure so that you could go home and read more about it. And also the opening of drawers, the examination table, gave her a sense of participation and the fact that you could bring your own stories into the gallery as a part of the process. And so I really, this was if you did this in order, this would have been the last pod that you would have encountered. And I really felt that it allowed us to produce this sense of wonder and resonance that Stephen Goldblatt has written about so eloquently. And it also has inspired me to think, well, what more can we do with the collections? Who else can we invite in? And how exciting an opportunity it really is, both for artists and for an institution, to allow this kind of thing to happen. And of course, it's a long lineage going back to Fred Wilson and his famous Mining the Museum at the Maryland Historical Society. So it's nothing new, but everything that would happen in this vein is something new. So that's Fowler at 50, at least a little taste of it.
Thanks very much, Marla. I think this is just so exciting to see. I want to know what the other 5 are. But this is a fascinating culmination in a way. I mean, I know you will go on to do many other things, but culmination to date of the work of this laboratory. I want to open this up to questions, of course.
Thank you for sharing so much. We just all wish we'd been there in LA to see it. My question was back in the history of risks you took, things that Fowler did differently. The comment about being maybe one of the first to present things themically rather than here we have Africa or even here we have Yoruba, but doing a bit of mix-up and then bringing things back together in temporary exhibits. And I'm wondering, because I get a sense, we've been going around visiting different museums, including yours, where the cultural area in the display of ethnographic material seems dead. It seems, and even in some art museums, there's this breaking down of barriers. Do you see yourselves in that sense, not just as the first, but maybe trendsetters? Do you see this as something that's happening, or do you still see resistance to it?
Describe that a little bit.
The idea that, well, if you go to, say, our Hall of Asian Peoples, here's Japan, and here's Korea, and here's China, and so on. If you talk to people at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco about what they're going to do new, or if you talk to the people in Brooklyn about what they're going to do, there's both an emphasis on how interactions and connections, and also in some senses a radical breaking down of the sectionalized presentations of cultural material.
I think it's happening all over, and I think even in art museums it's happening. I think if you look at the display of African art at Brooklyn, it's all thematically organized. I think the Minneapolis Institute of Art just opened a new exhibition that doesn't conform to these geographical there's a typical order in which it often happens. And where did I go where it was completely backwards? They started with Southern Africa, and they worked around to East Africa and West Africa and then Central Africa. I'm not remembering where it was, but that was completely different to, in a sense, go against the grain of how museums typically do this. But I think that we're seeing a desire for change. And I think we're not so nervous about people knowing nothing, you know, and coming into our galleries and encountering things for the first time, that there's, over the years, there's a bit more familiarity with what people are seeing.
I think at the New Ashmolean we had a presentation earlier this year by Christopher Brown, the director of the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. The New Ashmolean, with its theme of crossing boundaries, is part of this development of looking at connections across time and among peoples, and in sometimes unpredictable ways, which I think is really interesting.
And the Museum of Anthropology in Vancouver redid their visible storage, and I think they've got like 9,000 objects out, and it's all been organized by ocean currents, because a lot of the new research that's going on is about ocean currents, and we're actually hoping to get funding from the Getty to take down our European silver collection and create an installation by the same artist who did the beach balls, where he proposed to create a seaport out of all these individual decorative arts objects, plates and beakers and, tankards, to suggest that, of course, the silver crossed many seaports in order to get to Europe, where it was transformed into luxury goods, and that the whole global economy was based on silver that came from Bolivia and Mexico. And so all this European luxury stuff, you can tell a whole global history by looking at a European object. And it's typically only shown because of its final destination. So,
Yes.
Thank you, that was really wonderful. And I wanted to pick up on a theme that I think spanned your entire talk, which is the sacred in a museum setting. But particularly it was heightened, I think, with the example of the
Voodoo,
the Voodoo example, and I was hoping you could speak a little bit more about that, because I was really taken by this idea of the living altar and this idea of the experience within a particular space. And was it that it was going to be a religious or sacred experience that you were hoping to allow that to happen in your museum? And if so, can it and did it? And I was then thinking about the ethical responsibilities that brings, and not to sound too banal about it, but at the very end, the deconstruction, the denouement of a living altar. What happens? The practicalities of what happens with that post-exhibition, I'm just fascinated to hear about.
Well, I wasn't at the Fowler when we did the Sacred Arts of Haitian Voodoo, but I was at a talk that was given by a Mambo named Mama Lola, who was famously written about by a wonderful scholar named Karen Brown. And when she was in front of the audience, she fell into a trance. She literally was mounted by, I don't remember which Haitian Loa it was, and of course, we don't know whether it was real or not real, but that didn't really matter. But she did come under possession, and then she fell out of possession, and I wasn't there to witness it. But I do know that things happened inside of that sacred space. And I agree with you. It can be dangerous. And I think it can, you have to be very careful that you work with practitioners who are willing and able to create these altars for you. And I can tell you that we did an altar in this recent In Extremis exhibition, and the priests we wanted to bring from Haiti could not get a visa. And it was a Gede altar, and Gede is the trickster of death and sexuality, and the whole exhibition dealt with these really powerful themes, especially as they've played themselves out post-earthquake in Haiti. And all of the objects and materials had come from an incredible home altar that Marilyn Holberg had in her place in Chicago. So this was not a live altar, it was an altar. You'd be surprised how many of our art historian colleagues have altars in their houses and collect and create them. But we had transferred her material to the Fowler, and because they were potentially activatable, we were going to have this priest come and do it, but he couldn't make it. So we had to get a substitute Mambo from Boston who came to do the work, but she felt very uncomfortable with the material because it wasn't hers, and she didn't have the same feeling for the purpose of the altar. So it was a very uneasy situation. She wasn't happy, no one liked the altar, and it wasn't exactly a disaster. But now that it's in Quebec City, it's literally displayed in a case as if it's in Marilyn Holberg's living room. So they went back to where we should have done the same thing, basically. But I do think that there's a whole history of, there was the show, The Face of the Gods, that, wasn't that at the Museum for African Art? The one that Robert Ferris Thompson did. And all of those altars were live altars. They were all created by practitioners. People left coins, they left money, they came to them, people who that particular persuasion who live in New York, of which there are many.
Nina.
Yes, I have two comments and a question. First, I have to reiterate Laura's comments because it was a beautiful presentation, inspiring. For those of us who are in the kind of academy connected with the gallery or museum, it was really inspirational, and your portrayal of a cultural space connected with an academic institution as one that could take risks and has all these possibilities, I found fantastic. I wanted to comment that this notion of the trajectory of an artist's intervention with museum collections, starting with Fred Wilson, is actually something that right now at the BGC we somewhat dispel, because we have an exhibition up right now, the curators across the table, that looks at the collections of the American Museum, Natural History, and an intervention of American designers with their collections beginning in the interwar years. So this is something that I think should really get further embedded in the kind of knowledge base of when this phenomenon begins. And I hope you'll see it because it's fantastic. And I think it looks at interesting connections between sacred objects and contemporary things in a really fascinating way. But those are comments. But my question is, I'm really curious to know, the installations are beautiful, evocative, sensitive to the material, innovative in the display practices that they use. And I'm really eager to know how you go from the story to the display. And what is the, in one case you have an artist who comes in and goes through the collections and then creates his Kunstkammer, but this person is interacting with your curators, the designer, yourself, in these different pods. What is the practice? Was it consistent in the 50-year anniversary exhibition with what you had done before? Or did you...
You mean, was the process different? No, the process was the same. But it was made complicated by the fact that our designer had to work with 8 sets of curators. And each one of those exhibitions was either done by one of our own curators, or if we needed the expertise, we brought in guest curators. And there was always a point person who was one of our staff members who was the direct link to our designer. But when we talk about the content of these exhibitions, we make a lot of presentations. And so our designer is seeing how the thought process is unfolding and is learning about the kind of effect that a curator wants to make, or the ideas that need to be conveyed, or the particular needs of the objects, which are of course different in each instance. And I didn't show you the Zulu exhibition that we did, and I don't have a slide with me, but that exhibition was done to evoke and kind of recreate the concentric nature of a Zulu town. That it starts with the chief in the middle, and everyone lives in concentric rings moving out from that center. And the objects we showed were objects worn on the body, and so they took a round shape. So everything was done as a series of curves. And it was quite beautiful and completely unlike the sort of angularity of the Ibeji pod. And our designer came up with the idea of putting them against smoky mirror, because it was, of course, a double-doubling. And then you saw yourself in the mirror, too.
And you work from a model, from storyboards?
He creates, he does floor plans and he does models. And then we critique them. But we've actually been blessed with incredibly creative designers, but we've given them a lot of lead time, a lot of lead, if you will. I mean, they've been encouraged to be creative, and some might say, well, does the installation take too much, does it speak too loudly? Does it take too much of a role? And I think sometimes they're not as good as other times. Sometimes they intervene in ways that are intrusive to the ideas.
I think we'll have time just for
I think
couple more questions.
this gentleman had his hand up early.
Yes, please.
My question is rather mundane. You talk about the problems of conservation. I would think with such a big collection coming in big chunks, that finding the proper storage, correct temperature, correct humidity, and that the wooden objects wouldn't necessarily be ideally stored with the cloaks that you showed us.
Well, the collection used to be stored in the lower level of a classroom building. They were not in anything like an ideal situation. But because the collection has always been so big, it's amazing to look back. I mean, I was involved with the museum when I was a student, and we always had a conservator on staff. In fact, we often had two, because there was so much need to deal with collections and storage, to deal with objects coming in for exhibitions. But when we moved that collection from that funky classroom storage on sometimes wooden shelves, don't die, into this, into the new state-of-the-art storage. Did you work on the silver? No, you did. That's right.
From the Fowler house.
From the Fowler house. Before. Anyway, everything was inspected and everything was transferred. A lot of things were bagged that were problematic. A lot of things didn't go into the building that were really problematic, and you know, they're constantly doing spot checking. I mean, you can't do inventories and conservation on a collection that large, but every single piece that went into these sets of exhibitions was looked at by the conservators and stabilized if need be.
I hate to be the spoil sport. I know there are many more things that people would like to bring up. I'd like to bring up things myself. There will be an opportunity. I think the bottles of wine and the snacks are still outside, so I invite you to explore those. And I'd like to just say repeat one word that Nina used about what we've heard tonight, and I remember this feeling as well from my very first visit to the Fowler, which is inspirational. So, Marla, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I just want to mention that our next event in the Museum Conversations series is on January 27th, when Michael Conforti, director of the Clark Art Institute, will be coming to speak to us. So I hope you'll all be able to come to that. Thanks so much. This was just